Hello, this is Dr. Home and the Reverend Lang Lim. Pandamix, healing conversations and practices in between times. In the last episodes, we spent some time talking about the importance of feeling the body and also how to cultivate true stoicism, allowing ourselves to feel the pain and then hone that energy in and make choices from that place. In this conversation, we're going to deepen the conversation around pain by naming how we avoid pain and how that generates even more suffering. So the avoidance of pain, the escaping from pain, the ignoring of pain of ourselves, but also pain in the world, because we are connected to the world and the world is connected to us. And so I'm curious, Lang, what are something coming up for you in this topic of how do we avoid pain and how do we acknowledge pain?
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is avoiding pain is one of the ways that the human organism, survives. It's a way to protect, right? I mean, that's why people shield their eyes when they see something, horrible, and kids, run away because there's danger.
Mm-hmm.
But
so
I think
the fight, or freeze reaction.
I don't know how to put it into that frame. I'm just describing, I think, how all of us are. But then the avoidance of it is actually the avoidance of what having been a witness to pain, to trauma, to violence, to evil, to horror. That once a moment is past, it's not like it's past. Right? The trauma stays with us, the memory stays with us. It has an effect in our bodies. I mean, the book My Grandmother's Hands that we have been reading by Resmaa Menakem talks about that kind of retention of trauma in black bodies and white bodies and police bodies and all sorts of other bodies. And so then what we are avoiding is processing the retention of trauma in our bodies.
What you brought up about Resmaa Menakem.
Yes.
His work, and I love, he framed it around clean pain and dirty pain. Clean pain.
That's his words for it.
Right.
Yes, right.
His word.
Yeah.
Clean pain is pain that we just experience in the body, in the moment, that we could feel it, we experience that pain.
Yes, and it's clean not because it's nice. It could still be guilt and horror and fear and all of that, but you let it move through you.
You could feel it.
Right.
Now, dirty pain, how would you how did he define it?
Yeah, so Menakem, Resmaa Menakem's work says the dirty pain, and he's a psychotherapist, he's a black psychotherapist that's worked with people with trauma. He says the dirty pain is you go into blame. So all that pain, the fear and the trauma and the shame or whatever it is, you then blame someone else for it. So you project it on that person. It turns into anger and aggression towards the other. That could be kicking the dog. That could be on someone of another race or gender or whatever it is. That's blame.
Or blaming others, also blaming yourself.
Then you blame yourself. Then it's internalized, and when it's internalized, it can go several ways. Avoidance itself is a kind of dirty pain because you turn it inwards, and then the mind goes like, "Ooh, I don't want that." You compartmentalize it away, or you blame yourself, and then you go into self-aggression or really self-hatred. Becomes a really kind of big part of a coping mechanism, or denial, or depression.
Or escapism. There's a lot of running away from those pain, avoiding it.
We escape into all sorts of things. If we think of the pain that we've had, we can escape into even productive activities like work. That's part of the thing around workaholism. You can escape into social activism or activities. I think it might be helpful to ground some of this in in a story, and why we are bringing this up at both the personal, political, and historical level. Again, one of our frames is to unite all these different fields together. So when you were working in New Orleans with the Summer Principals Academy out of Columbia, I went to visit you, and we went to see a sugar plantation that had enslaved Africans to work on these sugar plantations. And we know that sugar became a way to finance British colonial expansion. So we went to this plantation, and it was obvious that what were the slave quarters were really horrible dwellings, and people looking at it and going, ooh, having a hard time seeing it. But for me, the hardest was, surprisingly, going to the slave master's house, which was a very modest house. It was a clean house, low roof, and stepping in, and then all of a sudden imagining myself being born into the slave-holding family's home. And then imagining myself growing up, where I might have a black boy or black girl to play with as a child, and knowing that at some point we will be forbidden to play, and I might see my ex-friend now whipped, abused out in the field. My father's the one doing it to him or her. Or the little black boy or girl is my half-brother or my half-sister. And to be a witness to this level of violence, to be born into a setup where the economics are such that for me to live, to be who I am in this life, I am a witness to such depredations, to such sorrows, as having my half-brother or half-sister or best friend taken away. And seeing this and witnessing this for my entire life, and then being told this is good, this is foreordained, and then participating in it. And as I let myself imagine this, I thought, I'm sure there were several that just thought this was fine, but quite a few would have had to numb out this internal dissonance within themselves.
Kind of like a psychological split.
Yes, you have to split your brain into two persons.
And it's not just the brain, it's your emotions.
Your emotions, your
being.
very self, your very being has to split. And then you think of the man who is out there whipping his slave, and then coming back home and trying to make love to his wife and be a loving father to his children. It's actually impossible to do that, so that the violence did come into the home. It came right there into the home.
This is connected to Reinhold Niebuhr and his writing in the book Moral
Man in Moral Society.
And how is it that possible for a law-abiding, God-fearing Christian man go to church every week and help his neighbor, and then go and hang out watching a lynching?
Yeah, indeed.
And what kind of psychological split that need to happen? And I think this happened at family level.
I mean, this is happening to us all the time. If we want to think back onto the last 20 years of of this country, meaning our country, the United States, where we have witnessed the bombing of countries in the Middle East, and knowing that our money has gone into that, and knowing that was an unjust war. And just simply bystanding, right, watching something horrible happen, feeling your own helplessness in correcting it, changing it, feeling afraid that if you speak out, you would lose respect or belonging. That level of bystanding creates trauma in the bystander. So you can be a perpetrator to violence, and you will feel and experience the trauma in yourself. But to bystand also does that. So then we grew up in a culture in which we avoid dealing with the retention of the pain. The pain is an emotional pain, is a moral pain, is a pain in the conscience. And so that's nicely packaged away in one part of the brain. We split, we disassociate. And then we spend our time engaging in all sorts of activities where
either numb out or checked out.
Numb out, check out, or get hyper involved.
So I know that in my own life experience, I've gone through war myself, and there are periods of time in my life where I use spiritual endeavors as an escape. Spend days and months doing meditation, and what I now thinking back, a lot of what my friend calls woo-woo, lama-lama, ding-dong stuff. Very California that way. Just escaping from one workshop to the next, looking for the next high peak experiences.
Or the next consolation.
Yeah. And I know I'm not alone in that, because I see many people use spiritual bypassing as a way to avoid dealing with personal pain in the context of family, for example. People run away from their families, or avoiding pain in the culture, in society as well. And so what is spiritual bypassing?
So so avoidance is bypassing, addressing the clean pain. And so the bypassing, as we have said, could be in activities and hyperworking, but there's a particular category of it, spiritual bypassing, where it looks like you are really dealing with the pain and the trauma, but it goes sideways. You go into spirituality, into the meditation, into elevated states of consciousness and whatever, you transcend it all, float above it. And there is some value in it, but it becomes a bypassing when either the consolation or the peace that comes from spiritual practice, whether it's Christian practice or Buddhist practice or what have you, becomes a way to substitute for not, again, directly addressing the trauma that has been experienced and that continues to be there. And we see it in several ways of people discounting, for example, the actual traumatic stories that are being told to them, that they are witnessing. You can see that when they simply don't have the stamina to listen to say, an African American actually ready to share their story of, say, police brutality or any kind of actual genuine hurt.
Mm-hmm. Or blaming the victim.
And then they go into this place of, well, why can't we just dwell in peace and love? And what you know from that moment, when they say, why can't we just hold hands and do peace and love? It's got nothing to do with peace and love. Of course, that's the solution. But what's going on with that person is they are unable to stay present to hearing the fullness of that pain. And it looks like they're so evolved. But where they've gone to is they've bypassed. And they are the ones seeking the consolation of, God or meditation or whatever. And so what they are practicing looks like it's spirituality. But it's being used to bypass the issue at hand. We do spiritual practice or any other kind of practice to strengthen ourselves so that we can come back, as it were, to the scene of the crime, in order to have that internal strength to look again, and to look again for two purposes: to bear witness to that person or that group being wronged, and to bear witness to ourselves and what we can now do differently. And so as a Christian, that's called redemption. Your spiritual practice of seeking consolation and love and forgiveness is so that you can come back to this place, the scene of the crime, to rectify it, to redeem it, to be present to it.
I invite everyone to take a breath, feel your body connected to the ground. A few more breaths. Allow the body to feel what it feels. I mean, I see this with many people, sometimes myself, using spiritual conversations to avoid the actual pain. And I love what you said about bearing witness. Bearing witness. To bear also, like to
bear, to bear here, bear on your shoulders, to bear witness. That is the work of justice making too. Sometimes people think justice making is you have a huge revolution to this, do or that. But again, speaking out of my tradition as a Christian, you bear witness. You bear witness to a crucifixion. You look, you say, yes, that's happening. You speak it. You testify to it, and you have the balls to testify to it. The word testimony and testicles are connected because the Romans believed, you swore an oath by holding on to another man's balls, the testicles, the capacity to tell truth, to see the truth. So it involves courage. And I think in our culture, meaning modern culture generally, but our American culture, there's actually a deep level of self-hatred that takes place across the board. One of the surprising things that the Dalai Lama discovered when he came to the West to teach people was people talk about hating themselves, and he was just completely astounded how one could hate self. But I think one of the ways in which there is this hatred is that we have as a culture, because of what we talked about, the winner take all, the contempt for the loser, the internalized contempt we carry on when we lose. No one needs to even tell you that you're a loser. You've lost, you already feel so awful and shitty about yourself. That's self-contempt. That's self-hatred. And that is, that's internalized. It's really much across the board. What people talk about that we have noticed in our work about feeling anxious, neurotic, self-critical, I think when we just...
And depressed.
And depressed and guilty and ashamed is that when you just keep on parting the murky waters, at the heart of it is contempt. Contempt for self, for being helpless, for being a beneficiary to exploitation and to being bystander. And then it comes out in the strangest of ways that we surprise ourselves when we are contemptuous towards others. You know that video of Amy Cooper in the park where she's a white woman who's calling the police because a black man has just told her to leash her dog. And this thing comes on. Now, my interpretation for that is living in a contemptuous culture towards others and self makes it indistinguishable. And what's coming up is just this deep, just this deep contempt.
Let's take a breath. The word contempt is not an easy word to be with. Contempt for others and contempt for ourselves. And I know I've done that myself. I think I don't know of any other more painful experience than the experience of being contemptuous. And I think this is, the word of John Gottman.
His work on family systems and relationships and couples relationships, and one of the most poisonous things he talks about is when within a coupled relationship one experiences criticism that then turns into contempt, and how poisonous it is to experience that.
So he said there was 4 things: contempt, criticism, stonewalling. What's the 4th?
Oh.
There was the 4th. It will come back in a moment. I want to actually bring it...
defensiveness.
Yeah, defensiveness. The other day we were watching and listening again to Martin Luther King's speech, the speech called Beyond Vietnam, where he took a stand.
Breaking the silence beyond Vietnam.
Breaking the silence. And as you were speaking about engagement, I'm just remind myself of Thich Nhat Hanh and his teaching on engaged Buddhism. During the war, there are many people of religious background avoided engaging in addressing the atrocity that was happening with the bombing and the provoking of the war in Vietnam. And his work in engaging people going beyond the monastery and go into the street to serve the suffering of others, to help heal others. And so to me, I think we are living in that time now. We are living in a time that is a war that is not just constrained to a country, it's all of the world. And I also think that we are living in a time where there's no escape. Doesn't matter how rich, how successful, how many degrees you have, how many vacation homes you have. We're living in a time collectively we cannot and no longer can afford to escape or to bystand. And then also we cannot also afford to go into hyper activism. So how to navigate all of this?
So if we cannot afford any of this, what should we be doing?
So at different levels.
By the way, we need to say that the rich people are suffering today because over the weekend they can't get onto their corporate jets to fly somewhere. That's probably the biggest frustration, is all of that money is really quite worthless if you can't have your lifestyle.
And
to be locked into your mansion is a
also
prison.
the trophies that you have, you cannot show off to other people because It's useless now.
Yes.
So I'm aware that how do we bring this awareness of the time that we're living in, and how do we engage each other? And so part of these conversations is we begin to stir up these different topics, again, not to shame, not to blame, but just begin to name what's happening. What's happening in each of us, what happened in between us, what happened collectively, so that we're not just looking for a solution, because it's not possible to find quick fixes right now. So then how do we cultivate ourselves so that we can be with pain, we can name the pain, we're not bystanding, we're not escaping. So how to do that?
So we are somewhat running out of time. You want to keep this for the next episode, or would you like us to touch upon this now as a segue to the next one?
So in a way, we're setting this up for the next conversations. But for now, I think it's important.
Okay.
I would like for you to underline a few things that we mentioned in this, so that the audience get very clear.
So I think what has happened in this particular episode that we are talking about is that, the pain takes place because actually what's been happening, right, is really a power game has been taking place. You're hurt because someone exercised power in a violent way. And we are bystanding to the misuse of power, whether it's economic power or gender power, in which real suffering takes place. And what is happening here that we are all invited to see is to look at our pain, but to really examine behind it was an assertion of raw, unilateral power that says, I can do to you whatever I want, and you don't matter. You become an object, you become a resource. And the same is done back to us. That spiritually, philosophically, psychologically, what's happening with this trauma is the use of power to diminish our personhood and humanity into being a thing. And so the restoration that we are looking at, even as we do this work of really looking, is the restoration and redemption of our personhood and humanity, which means the restoration back into love. So it is love that we are moving to and away from power. That's why the trophies that people accumulate, whether it's work trophies or trophy wives or trophy children, meaning you're acquiring these things to show off, you have turned them into objects. You have become an object too. That's where the pain resides. When we move to seeing relationships and personhood, therein lies the redemption.
I invite all of us to take a breath together. Feel a connection to the ground. Take a few deep breaths in and out. I think for me, and I invite all of us to approach these conversations with a sense of curiosity. Wow. What now? How to deal with this? How to be with this? How to create the capacity to be present, to listen, to feel. To feel is to heal. I have a teacher who said, if you can feel it, you can heal it. So we have to do this at the individual level, but also do it in a relational as well. And so I don't have a quick fix to this. I think this is partly why we're doing this. I really think that we're living in a time in between. What was 3 months, 6 months ago, my life, that life is gone. That life in New York and being a professor, that life is gone. And I assume for many of you, that life is also disappearing. Now, we don't know what's coming. because we're in this in-between times. And this in-between time is a beautiful time for us to really seek and understand the meaning of our lives. And there's a window here. If we miss this window, we're pretty fucked. I don't know what other word to say. And so, please take another breath with me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. We're looking forward to see you on the next episode.